그럼 지금부터 발표 세션 함께 하도록 하겠습니다. 첫 번째 발표는요, 글로벌 수소 정책 및 시장 동향에 대해서 함께 하도록 하겠습니다. S&P 글로벌 커뮤니티 인사이츠의 글로벌 가스 LNG와 하이드로젠의 부사장이신 샨카리 스리나바산님께서 수고해 주시겠습니다. 무대 위로 모시겠습니다. 여러분 큰 박수로 환영해 주시길 바랍니다.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much to the organizers for inviting us to speak here today. So I'm just going to kick off this set of presentations by giving a bit of a global market perspective and just give the next 15 minutes a little bit of an overview of our research and analysis on this. So during the first 6 months of 2024, we've seen many milestones. We've seen some finalizations of the policy framework in key consuming countries, and we've seen the opening up of public and private capital. So large projects are now underway. So what I'd like to discuss today is just touch on 3 topics, looking at the hydrogen production outline, looking at some of the global policies around the world, and particularly the customers' willingness to pay, and signaling some signposts for the following year and into the future for the development of the hydrogen industry. So first, let's take a look at the production pipeline. This is looking at the electrolysis pipeline itself, and it's looking at it year on year, so these comparisons are year to previous year. What we've seen is really operational capacity has doubled. Under construction projects are up by over 40%, and advanced planning is up by 250%. So we're looking here only at green hydrogen electrolysis projects, and this is an indicator in a way of the ones that are a little bit more difficult to get off the ground, but that these are moving. This data is coming from S&P's hydrogen asset database, so where we track all hydrogen production projects globally. Currently, we have about 1 gigawatt that's operational, and it is dominated by mainland China. The largest operating project is 250 megawatts, so a quarter of total global capacity. Under construction, you'll see it's much more geographically spread, and if we look at advanced planning, we're seeing that capacity has more than doubled in 1 year, and we're going to see more than 6 gigawatts added in 1 quarter. So really that this is maturing and it's accelerating. And if we think about the risk to this pipeline, really I would say there's more of an upward possibility than a downward risk. For China, we still have a very kind of limited visibility in the development of projects. And in the United States, when the rules 45V will be finalized later this year, that could trigger a whole set of new projects as well. So when we try to look to see how quickly an industry is developing, how does it compare to the other clean technologies, one way we've looked at it is to say, how long does it take to increase a technology by a factor of 100? And we're comparing against other technologies, onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, and batteries. So how long does it take to get to this 100-year mark? Now, what some of the policies around the world are really trying to do is to say, to accelerate the development of hydrogen. So for example, David Crane, who is the US Undersecretary of Infrastructure, when putting in the IRA, has said, we're trying to make hydrogen do in 5 years what solar did in 15 years. So if you look at our analysis, we think indeed hydrogen will meet this ambition. We see the electrolysis pipeline going up to 100 gigawatts by about 2030. So really that's in 6 years' time. It's expected to take what took over 10 years for stationary batteries or 13 years for solar to develop. Here's another metric to say how is the hydrogen industry developing around the world. And here we're showing green hydrogen electrolysis, blue hydrogen, That's the CCUS, so it would be with carbon capture. And if you look at the two, I'm not going to go into detail about it, but it's really just two other metrics to say the number of projects that we're seeing. So we're seeing 150 blue hydrogen projects developing around the world, 1,500, almost 1,500 for electrolysis. And if we look to the right, you can see the average project size of these projects. Of course, blue hydrogen with carbon capture and storage still has much larger scale than electrolysis size projects. So they have very different kind of risk profiles. Electrolysis, there's 1,500 because the scale is much smaller. The average size of a blue hydrogen with CCS is generally larger. We must remember carbon capture technology is not new. I mean, it's been used for many, many years for enhanced oil recovery. So in many ways, the technology is actually more advanced than electrolysis. CCS projects at the moment have been concentrated really in the US, Canada, and Europe, North Sea in Europe. So these are very large, important projects. Let's turn now a little bit to global policies, and that is really the critical driver, but also to take a look at the customer willingness to pay. So here, if we take a look, many countries around the world have an ambitious target for clean hydrogen production or consumption. Many countries have deployment targets, and some countries even have sector-based consumption targets. The US is currently the only one with a fixed production credits and no specific consumption targets. So if you look at the map around the world, you'll see that the global target for clean hydrogen in 2030 amounts to about 40 million tons globally, which is 40% of today's gray hydrogen consumption. So policies around the world are being deployed in many different ways to accelerate this development. We can look at cost reduction policies, so production support, like I mentioned for the US. Something that will accelerate renewable availability. So remember that the renewable cost, the electricity cost for electrolysis, still will represent about 50 to 70% of the total cost of electrolysis. So therefore, anything encouraging renewable availability will also be critical. Creating demand. So Europe has specific compliance targets. South Korea now with your current bidding, as well as, in a way, establishing kind of consumption targets. And otherwise, infrastructure build-outs, so like what we've seen in the US with the hubs, or what we're seeing in Japan with a hub support scheme for shared infrastructure. Just a timeline to say, look at the acceleration we're really seeing this year. There has been some question marks about whether is hydrogen really happening. Europe may have been first to establish some of the policies, but now we're really seeing very fast development of policies around the world, and here in Korea, of course, this first bidding type policy, which is really critical. And through 2024, we'll see that we've got many support schemes in place, and it's really accelerating towards the end of this year. So just a comparison of costs for blue and green. As you can, and we put the abated natural gas basis at the bottom as well, and then the premium over gray hydrogen. So blue hydrogen will have a modest cost reduction over time. It is more economical than gray if we have a carbon credit of around $100 per ton of carbon. And by 2050, we estimate that if that value is around $70 per ton of carbon dioxide, that would be equivalent. And you could even see the flipping of economics, meaning that with that sort of carbon credit, blue becomes more competitive than with gray. Green hydrogen, we're expecting a more steep cost reduction. It's still relatively expensive compared to blue and gray. But if you employ techniques of hybrid generation, so hybrid wind with solar or hydro, then you could be at the bottom end of that green range at about $2 per kilogram. So closing the gap, I mean, where can governments play a role? I've talked about this a little bit, but really we've categorized these into 3 ways. Production support, so if you provide fixed tax credits, like in the US or Canada, you use an auction-based, like we're seeing in the EU, that's just happened with the Hydrogen Bank, or if you're using some sort of contracts for differences as well. In terms of consumption support, the contracts for differences for power generation, like we're seeing here in South Korea, or we will see in Japan, or any kind of carbon contracts for differences as well. We're still waiting on the final plans for the US for the 45V, so that also could speed up development in the US as well. And then consumption mandates or kind of compliance targets that, like in the EU, Japan, Korea, will also accelerate development. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm not going to spend too much time on this chart. This is just a result, just to talk a little bit about what's happened under the EU auctions. If you look at the horizontal bar, that's kind of the range of cost that we expect for electrolysis. If you look at the stacked bars, these are the cost of unabated production, the carbon cost, and then confirmed support. The European Commission awarded a total of 720 million euros to support 7 projects with a total capacity of about 1.5 gigawatt hours. I'll just highlight the results. The results are similar to the Netherlands and Denmark, but contrast heavily with the UK. The average subsidy in the Netherlands, Denmark was 2 euros, and it contrasted with the UK at about 9.5 pounds per kilogram. I should say that the European auctions were highly competitive. They were oversubscribed. The bids came in very low, and one of the real factors for this was having such a wide range of participation across the EU, and particularly in areas where there was low electricity priced available, so great renewable regions that could provide electricity at low cost. The auction design was also very important. So if there was a strict commissioning time, like there was in the UK, that tended to produce a different result than if there were not strict commissioning times. Just quickly to show, here is a chart comparing what is the hydrogen cost based on the differences of electricity prices, costs, and feedstock prices, and the capacity factors. And essentially, we want to point out that if projects that are sort of behind the meter or attached together are coming out with lower costs for hydrogen, so around 4 euros per kilogram, compared with if you were to have a power purchase agreement, so that's the dot at the extreme right, where you would have to then use that power purchase agreement in order for additionality rules. So really just the sensitivity of the electricity cost is important and the capacity factor to drive these prices. I'm going to skip this one and skip the one on Japan. So just briefly to sum up, I'll just talk about the signposts to watch. For the next, the Hydrogen Bank results have come out, as I said, oversubscribed, very large number, and lower cost bids than were accepted. The other signposts we're looking out for globally are, of course, here in Korea. The bid has been launched. What will be the results in December? Same thing for Japan. We're looking at some of the final investment decisions that will come in for blue hydrogen, 45Q, and when the specific results on the tax credits, 45V, when they are provided, that will encourage the pipeline as well, and some of the larger scale projects as well. So some of H2 Green Steel is a very large 700 megawatt project, and some of the final investment decisions in the Netherlands as well. So just to conclude, I would say low carbon hydrogen projects moving ahead in all regions of the world. The policy clarity that's definitely come up this year has provided a lot of investor confidence, I'd say, to move forward with many projects. Without production support, low carbon hydrogen will be a premium product still, but compared with other clean technologies, that's the comparison should be. Compliance buying, that means imposing any kind of target, is of course encouraging the development, and consumption targets as well are encouraging the development as going forward. Thank you very much, and I will pass back to the moderator.